Okay, so here we go, you guys. I'm excited to be talking about this topic. I've been working on this course for quite some time now. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. You are in listen only mode so that we can capture a recording. So if you want to share this with some of your staff, I know I see a bunch of managers online here. We'll have a recording posted. Rob will post that up for us probably sometime early this week. I wouldn't be surprised if he puts it up later today. The second thing is that you will be able to ask as many questions as you would like. I have about 40 to 45 minutes of content, I think. And at the end, I'll field questions. And the way it works with questions is there's a questions tab in that GoToWebinar window. And so you just have to open up that question and you'll be able to see a place for you to type in your question, and then I'll go from there. I'll do my best to answer all of your questions about these popular diets. So without further ado, let's dig in. You guys can all see my presentation here. Let me just move some stuff out of the way. We're going to go through a little bit of background, and then the paleo diet, ketogenic diet, intermittent fasting, like Neil said, if it fits your macros, which is what that is, that acronym IIFYM. And then we'll do a little bit of a conclusion. So that is the content on a high level for now. Okay, so let me get this going. Oops, that was the wrong one. Hold on, let me get the right one. Okay, so a little bit of background. Who is actually diet? I thought we would start by talking about prevalence of people who are on a weight loss diet. And I looked up the stats in terms of the current population in the United States, and it's around 329.2 million people that currently reside in this country. 2 of 3 adults are now overweight, right? So obesity and overweightness has happened in our generation under our watch, unfortunately. And as a result, you can see by these stats presented by the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, America is now fatter than ever. And obese individuals, at least adults, you can see almost at 40%, 4 out of 10. And then in our youth, we're now almost at 1 out of 5 kids are obese. So it is an epidemic, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. Maybe some other stats that have come out in the last couple of years show differently. But the bottom line is that people are desperately seeking solutions. And so it's probably not a surprise that about 65 million people are dieting at any given moment. And as fitness professionals, obviously, you can see by this picture, there's a lot of options out there for what diets people can or are looking to do. And of course, there's a lot of misinformation. And it's hard to tell, what's really good, what's going to be beneficial to my client, what's not going to hurt my client, what's going to help me help them reach their weight loss goals. And so that's really the intention of our course today. Is this masterclass is going to cover and hopefully empower you to set your clients up for their best chance to succeed when working with you. So I'll go over the guidelines for each diet, typically what foods are allowed, what foods aren't allowed, and then we'll go a little bit through claims. What are the claims? How valid are they in terms of how the diet works? Then we'll talk about pros and cons. We'll do some fact checking, and we always do fact checking with either basic human physiology, nutritional biochemistry, or we'll do it through the research. We'll look at actual studies that have utilized the diets in humans when available. Most have used in humans. I'll close with what the best weight loss diet is. And then finally, I'll give you the 7 habits of successful weight losers so that you have some tangible, practical information to apply right away. Okay, so let's get started with paleo diet. So the paleo diet is also known as the Stone Age, the hunter-gatherer diet, the ancestral diet, the primal, caveman, and Neanderthal diet. So it's got a lot of different names, but essentially it's under the umbrella of the paleo diet. Now, in general, the premise is that you only eat foods available during the Paleolithic period. And that period was approximately 2.5 million to 10,000 years ago. And around 10,000 years ago is when humans started to adopt farming and domesticating animals. And that essentially changed the food supply. So proponents of this diet say, just eat the way our ancestors ate, and that's the best way to eat, so to speak. So as you can see, you would eat meat and you would eat fish, insects. If you're going to eat meat products, they ate all parts, including the bone marrow and the organs and the eyeballs and things like that. You could also have the products of animals, eggs that you could gather. Obviously, you could gather honey, fruits and vegetables, and then nuts and seeds. So those are the approved foods on the paleo diet. Well, what can't you eat? Well, anything that you couldn't, obtain in that time period. So dairy foods, although some versions of the paleo diet allow for grass-fed dairy, milk, cheese, yogurt, etc. Can't eat any grains or grain products, so forget the bread, the cereal, the pasta, bagels, etc. Oatmeal. The legumes, which includes beans, peas, lentils, and peanuts. And then anything that's essentially processed. So any refined grains, crackers, as you can see, donuts, processed fats, added sugars, and of course, no alcohol. So Neil would never do this diet. All right, so what does this diet claim? How does it claim to work? Well, essentially, they claim that our ancestors did not have chronic diseases of modern day men, like obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. And so the implication here is that certain foods cause chronic disease, right? There's also the implication that, our bodies and our biology, we're not made to digest foods that are sort of man-made, if you will. So those are sort of the claims that come with the paleo diet. When we fact check the paleo diet, what you'll see by anthropologists is there were a lot of ways that our hunter and gatherer ancestors ate, and it varied by geography. So the different colors on these bar graphs represent different food groups, right? So blue, milk and cornmeal, and then yellow, seeds and nuts, etc. And you can see there's a wide variation between the components of the diets and the geography, the places where they lived. So the Inuit, right, they had more access to meat and fish because of where they were located, as opposed to the Kung in South Africa, where it's more dry, that had to eat more seeds and nuts. So the bottom line is there is no paleo diet, and that's what anthropologists have discovered over the course of time, analyzing past humans and how they behaved and lived. It totally varied according to where you live, and that makes sense. Okay, so there's no one paleo diet. Now, in terms of chronic diseases, well, this is pretty obvious, right? The lifespan of our paleo ancestors was significantly shorter, between 15 and 40 years, as opposed to today, where the average male, I think the lifespan is around 78. For females, it's around 79. So, they didn't live as long, so they couldn't live long enough to develop a chronic disease. But what's interesting is anthropologists have found evidence of plaque buildup in mummies who lived in that time. And this is a study that was published in the Lancet. So one, they didn't live long enough, and two, there really was evidence that they did have chronic disease. Now, some of the paleo proponents also will claim, hey, humans, we don't digest dairy very well. Therefore, we should not consume dairy products, right? And this is true for some people. However, what we found is that much of the population, I should say 40% of the population, has adapted to milk exposure. So there's the genetic mutation that keeps lactase, the enzyme that breaks down milk sugar, on after infancy. And it has to do with the fact that babies were exposed to milk after dairy became prevalent. So yeah, our bodies have learned to adapt according to the environment and the food supply. So that's pretty interesting. And then also, many people don't realize that they're what's called maldigesters. In other words, you can tolerate small amounts, like approximately 12 grams, which is the amount that's in about, one serving of dairy or a cup of milk or a serving of yogurt. So although people claim that they can't digest, they're lactose intolerant, many can still consume small amounts. So bottom line is the human body does adapt to what is exposed to. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't have survived all these thousands and thousands of years. Okay, another paleo fact check. Our ancestors did not eat grains, right? Well, again, scientists have discovered evidence of starch grains and tools in order to grind up the grains in these species or in these communities where Neanderthals lived. So there's evidence that, hello, people did eat grains in that time. And then what about the claim that the paleo diet is good because it eliminates grains which cause inflammation? So what we know is 1% of the population is inflicted with celiac disease. And celiac disease is the inability to tolerate the protein gluten found in grains. So 1% of the population, this is true for. Now, it's estimated that another 10% of the population, a small amount, has gluten sensitivity. So for these individuals, yes, it might be a good idea. In the case of celiac, you have to avoid it. In the case of gluten sensitivity, it's a good idea to probably avoid grains. However, for processed foods, highly processed foods, the refined grains, basically your junk foods, yeah, you can increase markers of inflammation, but it's typically in the presence of obesity and or chronic excessive calorie intake. So it's not the case just because you eat junk food, you automatically get inflamed. Now, it's not true for whole grains. Whole grains have been found to decrease inflammation, and they're also a good source of fiber, which is important for your microbiome, for your gut health. Okay, now what about this concept of legumes? So paleo proponents will argue legumes were not consumed, and they're bad for you because they contain anti-nutrients. So let's fact check that. Again, archaeologists have discovered residues of grains in legumes in paleofossilized human dental plaque. So basically the teeth of paleo men and women, you could see residues of grains and legumes. Also, anti-nutrients like phytic acid are neutralized with cooking, or either that, you have to consume such a large quantity in order for them to have a detrimental effect. For example, phytic acid in whole grains, it's got some benefit. It helps to bind heavy metals like lead and cadmium in the gut, and it also enhances our immune cells. So a lot of the claims around the paleo diet, they don't seem to be holding up when we do a fact check. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the paleo diet research. What does actual research show in terms of weight loss? So I took a look at a bunch of short-term studies, right, between 3 and 12 weeks. And what I found was that the paleo diet works. It has similar amounts of weight loss as the Mediterranean diet, which is a higher fat diet, right? You also show improvements in waist circumference and glucose sensitivity. It helps people feel fuller. So independent of calories and macros, it has a satiating effect, therefore helping to manage hunger. It also has benefits on health markers like blood pressure and blood fats. So all good outcomes for short-term trials on the paleo diet. Okay, here's what it also showed that about half of the people on paleo diet became deficient in calcium. People reported it being very difficult to adhere to. And in terms of inflammation, there were no significant improvements in the markers of inflammation like C-reactive protein. So got some benefits, and then it looks like, it's got some setbacks as well, which we're going to find with each of the diet. Now, the longest paleo study that I could find ended up being a 2-year study involving 70 obese women who were postmenopausal. And they were randomized to the paleo diet or Nordic nutrition recommendations, which is similar to our dietary guidelines for Americans, which doesn't eliminate any food group, but in the Nordic countries. So what they found was the paleo group lost significantly more weight in the short term at 6 months, but after 2 years, there was no difference. They also found similar improvements in blood pressure, C-reactive protein, which is what CRP is, a marker of inflammation, and cholesterol, but in terms of insulin and fasting glucose, there were no differences between the paleo diet or the general nutrition recommendations in these Nordic countries. Okay, so that was the longest paleo study that I could find. So what are the pros of this diet? We know that you see some weight loss on it, which is great, what people are looking for. Some of the pros are, I really like the emphasis on the fresh whole foods and the variety of foods, because humans tend to be creatures of habit, and tend to, limit their micronutrient intake because they don't have a lot of food variety. It's also a good diet because it eliminates a lot of processed foods, and many people eat too much processed foods. They get too many calories from processed foods, added sugars, added fats, and of course, sodium. So that gets eliminated in the paleo diet. The paleo diet's also good because it encourages more cooking, right? And more meals at home. And research shows that when people cook at home, they tend to eat better when they cook at home. And of course, it creates a calorie deficit and promotes weight loss. And then whenever you lose weight, regardless of the method, you're always going to see some improvements in markers of health, namely blood pressure and blood lipids. Excuse me. So what are the paleo diet cons? So here are the cons. Micronutrient deficiencies, primarily calcium and vitamin D. Why? Because you eliminate dairy altogether. So you eliminate an entire food group. Well, you're going to eliminate some essential nutrients. And remember, essential nutrients, by definition, are not produced in the body. So if you don't get them from an outside source, then some parts of the body are going to break down. It also eliminates a good source of carbohydrate, your whole grains, and which is a good source of fiber, iron, your B vitamins, and minerals. So that's not good. It eliminates plant protein sources, and we know there's a lot of benefit from plant protein sources. It's overly restrictive to eliminate just imagine, can you imagine going the rest of your life not eating birthday cake? Like that to me sounds, maybe not for you, but for me, that might be too restrictive. And then it can be expensive to transition to a complete whole foods diet. So those are some of the drawbacks from the paleo diet. Okay, so I see some hands going up, and I appreciate you guys have questions, and I'm definitely going to answer all of these questions. So in case you missed the beginning of the webinar, I'm going to answer all of your questions. It's just I'm going to do it at the end once I'm done with all the content, and then I'll be able to do that. Now, some of you might be having audio problems, and from all accounts on my end, the people that are connected at the corporate office, they can hear me just fine. So it might be your Wi-Fi signal if you're having issues with your audio, okay? All right, so let's continue with the ketogenic diet. Okay, so what is a ketogenic diet? What is it? It is not a high protein diet. That is a modified version of the keto diet. The classic ketogenic diet is a very low carb diet and very high fat. And as a matter of fact, the original ketogenic diets were about 90% fat. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is the modified ketogenic diet that's used more in the mainstream. And that is 50 grams of 50 grams of carbohydrate maximum per day, which comes out to about 5 to 10% of total calories. Moderate amounts of protein, so 10 to 20% of total calories. Why is that moderate amounts? Because higher amounts can kick you out of ketosis, out of a state of ketosis, because the skeletons of protein can be used to produce glucose, right, which is gluconeogenesis. Super high in fat, so when the majority of your calories are going to come from fat, and it's typically verified with measuring ketones in the urine with using keto sticks or something similar like that. Okay, so you can see the depiction here, super high fat, low carbohydrate, moderate protein diet is what it is. So the ketogenic diet was initially used in the 1800s. It's been around forever. So it was used in the 1800s for diabetes treatment. It was then found to be effective for treating people with seizures or epilepsy. So that happened in the early 1900s. And then what happened was sort of the whole low carb craze began with the Atkins diet in the 1970s. And then Gary Taubes wrote several books in 2007 popularizing the notion of low carb diets, claiming that low carb diets were the best diets on the planet. And then the ketogenic diet evolved from there. So now I think the craze lately is the carnivore diet, which is, believe it or not, an extreme form of the ketogenic diet. So, but today we're going to go through the ketogenic diet. That's really the timeline. It was used as a treatment for epilepsy, seizures, very effectively, primarily in kids. So here's a sample breakdown of the ketogenic diet. You can see a 1,600 calorie diet would give you 20 grams of carbs, 80 grams protein, 133 grams of fat. In the 2000 higher calorie diet, you get a little bit more carbs, 5 more grams of carbs, a little bit more protein, and then a lot more fat. So that's a sample breakdown of what it would look like. So what can't you eat? What's banned on the keto? Pretty obvious. Any carbohydrate-rich food is going to be a no-no on the ketogenic diet. So cereals, pastas, bread, everything you see on the screen, most of your veggies, most fruits and fruit juices, legumes, etc., all are banned foods on the ketogenic diet. So what does that leave us with? That leaves us with foods that are high in fat, right? And then protein-rich foods. So in this case, the bulk of the diet is going to come from foods high in saturated fat and other fats like butter, lard, fatty cuts of beef, meats, poultry, fish, and then also unsaturated fats, whether that's your plant oils, avocados, nuts and seeds. Of course, the nuts have to be low in carbohydrates like macadamia and walnuts so that you stay within ketosis. Okay, so then we have sour cream, hard cheese, some dairy, certain fruits in small amounts like berries, and then your non-starchy vegetables. So let me just back real quick with the ketogenic diet. So when you restrict carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates are the preferred fuel source for primarily your brain, your red blood cells. And when you restrict carbohydrates, it forces your body to produce ketones, hence the name, the ketogenic diet. And those ketones can be utilized by the brain. And the brain requires around 100, 120 grams per day of ketones. And so what it does is it shifts fuel utilization from carbohydrates to your ketones. So now you've got a bunch of ketones floating around the body, and you end up in this state of ketosis. Okay, so what are the keto diet claims? Well, carbohydrates stimulate the release of insulin. And insulin is a hormone that drives fat storage. So therefore, if we don't eat carbs, we don't release insulin. And if we don't release insulin, then it forces the body to break down fat. And that breaking down of fat is what produces the ketone bodies. And as a result, the claim is that you're going to get this metabolic advantage over other weight loss methods. You're going to burn more calories and you're going to just magically burn more fat by just taking away carbohydrates. Okay? In other words, it's basically vilifying carbohydrates. So, do a quick fact check. Insulin alone does not drive fat storage. That's just part of the story, right? You have to have a calorie surplus, and I'm going to back this up with some research. The primary function of insulin is to help regulate blood sugar. Okay, so it's going to help keep your blood sugar levels in homeostasis. Your body's always fighting to be in balance, in homeostasis. So let's take a look at this graphic here. So you start with a normal blood glucose level at the bottom, right? Blood sugar. So because humans are periodic eaters, we eat every 3, 4, 5 hours or so for the most part in general, right? Your blood sugar level is going to drop as time goes by after a meal. So when that happens, you eat, obviously. Some of you get grumpy, right? You get symptoms of blood sugar. So you eat. And your blood sugar increases as depicted by this arrow here, and you get this hyperglycemia, or your glucose levels increase. So that will stimulate the pancreas, the beta cells primarily, to release insulin. Again, insulin is a hormone. It travels from the beta cells of the pancreas, and it targets other organs like your liver and muscle tissue to do something. In this case, it stimulates, those of you who remember from biology, your GLUT4 transporters, right? And those transporters, their job is to take glucose out of the bloodstream and put it into the liver and muscles so that your blood glucose levels normalize, goes back to homeostasis, and the body is then happy. So it stores the food that we eat for later use, knowing that humans, once again, are periodic eaters. And we're going to eat again, so that energy is going to be stored for later use. So then what happens? So over time, you don't eat, right? You get low blood sugar, and then the pancreas release a counter-regulatory hormone. In other words, it works hand in hand with insulin. It releases glucose, and that does the opposite. It's going to now go, oh, your blood sugar's getting low. Let's put you back in balance and homeostasis. Let's stimulate your liver to release the stored carbohydrates, glycogen, into the bloodstream, so then you can now be in homeostasis, in balance, right? So this happens multiple times throughout the day as you eat. What determines whether or not you become overweight? If you consume excess calories. But just because insulin is stimulated does not mean you gain fat. Okay, and we've got some research studies to look at that. So Kevin Hall, he's at the National Institutes of Health. He's done a lot of research in this area. He conducted a metabolic ward study, and that's essentially when they put people into a ward of a hospital so that they can measure everything related to their bodily processes, including energy expenditure, how much fat they burn, and then they also analyze their body composition using the most accurate and sophisticated methods. So in this study, he put 17 obese people comparing isocaloric diets. And this is a very important point, is that the diets were the same number of calories, okay? And what they did was the subjects followed a high-carb baseline diet for 2 weeks and then switched to a low-carb ketogenic diet for 4 weeks. So calories and protein were matched so that they wouldn't be confounding variables. It wouldn't influence the results, right? They just wanted to analyze, do you burn more calories? Do you lose more fat on this ketogenic type diet? You can see the subjects also exercised. All food was provided. There was no access to other foods, and then the meals were supervised to verified intake. So here's a breakdown. The BD, which stands for baseline diet, right? You can see it's the same as the KD, the ketogenic diet. The protein was the same, and then carbohydrates on baseline was 300. During keto, it was the less than 50 amount that I mentioned earlier, and then fat obviously switched to a high. Here's what was found in this. And here's sort of a depiction of the study design. You can see there's a 4-week inpatient. So 2 weeks was used to adjust energy intake so that they were in calorie balance, right? And then you've got this here, 2 weeks on a baseline high carb diet, followed by 4 weeks. And then these little data points mean they were in the chamber getting measured. The arrows indicate their body composition was measured, and then the DLW, that's doubly labeled water. They were given that dose because doubly labeled water is a way of measuring energy expenditure. Okay, so the results. Insulin decreased on the ketogenic diet. Not surprising. Don't eat carbohydrates, don't release insulin. Not surprising. You also saw an increase of fat oxidation. Again, not a surprise. When you eat a lot of fat, well, guess what's going to happen? You're going to burn a lot more fat. They did see a small 100-calorie increase in EE, which stands for energy expenditure. But that only happened during the first week of the ketogenic diet, and then it normalized. Here's the thing. Fat loss rates were similar. So what they concluded was that there was no metabolic advantage observed with the ketogenic diet. You might see a slight increase in calorie burn that first week, but at the end of the day, you lose similar rates of fat loss. So no metabolic advantage. Now, you're probably wondering, well, it's too short. Okay, so there were some longer term studies that were done. Let me just review some of the other short-term studies that I was able to go through. And basically what the short-term studies that lasted up to 10 weeks showed, and here's where the big benefit of the ketogenic diet is. People spontaneously eat less on the ketogenic diet, and as a result, they lose weight. So yeah, does it induce weight loss? 100%. Now, here is where we get more in depth into the research. This is a meta-analysis. Okay, this is a meta-analysis of 13 randomized controlled trials. This was comparing a keto diet versus a low-fat diet on studies that were at least 1 year long. Okay, those are considered long-term studies. So this meta-analysis pooled the results from 1,415 subjects and either got a low-fat diet or a keto diet, and you can see that they had some improvements in health markers like weight, triglycerides, blood pressure, good cholesterol, etc. But you also see a hike up in your bad cholesterol, LDL, and take a look in white. The weight loss difference between the two diets after 1 year was just 2 pounds. So not drastically different between a high carb, low fat and the ketogenic diet in terms of weight loss. But again, there was benefit. They did lose weight. Now, I did come across a study on 25 resistance-trained college males, and they showed a slight fat loss advantage over 11 weeks. So individuals on a ketogenic diet, you can see 2.2 kilograms lost, or closer to 5 pounds, versus 3 pounds lost, a little over, 1.5 kilograms. So there's that study. Okay, this is probably the most compelling evidence we have around the ketogenic diet, and this was a meta-analysis of 28 controlled trials. And these trials, right, they analyzed keto calorie-matched low-carb versus low-fat diets and their effects on body composition and energy expenditure, calorie burn. So this chart here lists all the studies, all 28 trials, and in this case, it's energy expenditure we're looking at. On the left-hand side, it favors the low-fat diet. On the right-hand side, it favors the low-carbohydrate diet. So you can see 8 of the 28 studies found the low-carb diet led to higher energy expenditure than high. Only 4 were statistically significant. Then you have 20 studies that reported the high-carb diet led to greater energy expenditure than low-carb. 14 of those were statistically significant, right? And then you have the fact that, okay, does that even make sense? Well, if you consider the thermic effect of feeding, which is the calories required to digest the macronutrient like carbohydrate, well, that's higher than it is for fat, right? It's around 8 to 10% of calories from carbs are used to digest it, whereas for fat, you will only use about 1% of your calories to digest fat. So if you pull the results, lower fat diets, you burn around 26 more calories per day on a lower fat diet than you do on a low carbohydrate diet. So here are these results continued. Now this is the weighted difference in body fat in grams. So left-hand side is the low fat diet, right-hand side is the low carb diet. So if you just look at all the lines and where they're leaning towards, you can see they're favoring the low fat diet in terms of body fat loss. So there's 20 studies, right? Only 3 favored the low carb. Diets of equal calories from carbs and fats have a similar impact on fat loss and energy expenditure. And so the body of evidence suggests slight advantage for high carbohydrate diets. But look at the advantage. It's 16 grams greater per day. So it's not like it's significantly greater. But that's the weight of the evidence so far. Okay, so what do we conclude? Yes, you lose weight on the ketogenic diet, you decrease insulin, you increase fat oxidation on the short term. It's equally effective as other calorie-restricted high-carb diets long term. It also suppresses appetite, independent of protein intake. So you're not gonna feel hungry, and that's what I hear from a lot of people who follow the ketogenic diet. You probably hear the same thing. You're just not going to eat as much. There's lack of evidence for supporting a metabolic advantage, and then carbohydrates and insulin, independent of excess calories, do not cause weight gain. So for those of you who sort of believed or thought that carbohydrates are fattening, this is just not the case. It's just they're independent of excess calories, doesn't automatically result in you gaining weight. What does happen if you're eating low carb and then you do eat high carb is you retain more water, and that tends to feel like you're gaining more weight, and it can appear like your weight goes up as well because you're carrying more water. So some of the pros of the ketogenic diet, we've already said it, you're going to eat less. And in one study over 4 weeks showed that they spontaneously ate almost 300 calories less over 4 weeks. It's a pretty simple strategy, right? Straightforward, just don't eat carbs or eat very little. And people tend to like simple solutions, right? But simple is not the same thing as easy. You also have this appetite suppressing effect. So it could be due to ketosis itself, it could be due to the high fat content, but bottom line is people don't like feeling hungry. So that's definitely a benefit of the ketogenic diet. Some of the cons are the restrictive nature. It's highly, highly restrictive to not eat carbohydrates. You have to be super careful, which makes adherence really challenging, right? I mean, typical keto meals will sometimes be just a bunch of spinach with drizzled in olive oil and a little bit of protein. So sometimes for some individuals, it's really challenging. Others individuals like it. So it just depends on the person. Protein intake might be suboptimal for body composition changes. We know that the body of research favors higher protein intakes for fat loss and or muscle tissue building. We also have this lower fiber intake and limits in fruits and vegetables. Well, if you limit fruits and vegetables, what else are you going to limit? You're going to limit micronutrient, essential vitamins and minerals, and that does have a long-term detrimental effect. And we really don't know what the long-term implications are of doing this diet. Now, if you have a clinical condition, the research has shown that seizures, as well as cancer, as well as Alzheimer's, there's definitely a clinical benefit from using the ketogenic diet, which you would have to do that in conjunction with a health professional. So I'm not giving you advice. I'm saying if you or someone you know has a clinical issue, they should talk to their doctor or their healthcare professional about this diet. Okay, intermittent fasting, are you ready? So let's do intermittent fasting. So what do we know about intermittent fasting? Again, another thing that's super popular nowadays, and the basic premise is you just don't eat for a set time period, right? Followed by eating whatever you want. So that's high level what intermittent fasting is. There's lots of different types of intermittent fasting. I'm going to go through 3 of the major types right now. So the alternate day is don't eat for 24 hours, eat for 24 hours. Pretty straightforward. Whole day is at least one 24-hour period of no or limited eating. And then there's time restricted eating. That's basically eating within a certain time window. Okay, so intermittent fasting. You've probably heard there's a lot of benefits of fasting, like words like autophagy or apoptosis or longevity and aging, etc., extending lifespan. A lot of that research has been conducted primarily in animal models. I mean, this is a really fast-growing area of research, but most of it came from animal models, and a lot more needs to be done in human subjects. Okay, alternate day fasting is the most well-studied type of fasting, and what they found is overall, what fasting does, it decreases calorie intake by about 20 to 25%. It results in people eating less, and of course, when people eat less, they lose weight. So it's effective for weight loss. In some studies, they show that you could also retain lean body mass during fasting, while in other studies with greater calorie deficits, they didn't observe that lean body mass was preserved. So here's one study on alternate day fasting, 2016 study. It was the first to compare fasting to just restricting calories on a daily basis, right? Or they call that continuous caloric restriction. Which one's better? Is fasting better? Is traditional dieting better? And so they took 26 obese adults, randomized them to fasting, followed by ad lib eating. And ad lib eating means you can just eat whatever you want in whatever quantity you want. So one group did that. The other group did a 400 calorie day restricted diet, which is just a deficit of 400 calories with all the foods provided. So this study was 8 weeks long. Here's what it found. People lost weight. Surprised? So the alternate day fasting group, they ended up creating a 376 calorie deficit per day with no adverse effects. And they lost similar amounts of weight. There you have it. At 24 weeks, there was a follow-up period, there were no significant differences in weight regain. So it seems to be equally effective as traditional dieting or maintaining a daily calorie deficit. Now, there's also whole day fasting, which is 1 to 2 days of eating up to 25% of calories. And the most common type of whole day fasting is this 5-2 diet. That's 5 days of your regular diet, what you normally eat, and then 2 days interspersed of eating 400 to 500 calories per day. That's whole day fasting. And the research is super limited in this area. I came across 7 short-term studies up to 6, between 10 weeks and 6 months long, where 1 or 2 days of modified or complete fast, 3 of the studies were on overweight, obese individuals. 3 of the studies were on normal weight individuals. And here's what they found. They lost weight. People who did this lost weight. 3 to 9% decrease in weight and fat. No change in lean mass in 3 studies. Also, you saw improvements in cholesterol as well as triglycerides. Again, I have to reiterate, anytime you lose weight, you're going to see improvements in blood lipids, and in most cases, blood pressure. So it's not a function of the diet, it's more a function of weight loss itself. Now, time-restricted eating. What do we know about time-restricted eating? It's the daily window, right? Eating within 4 to 12 hours, followed by a fasting period. So a common one is a 16-8 or an 8-hour time-restricted window. And the basic premise also comes from animal research and looking at our circadian rhythms. And so what these researchers believe is that our bodies have a circadian rhythm. It has a clock that all of our systems follow optimally. If we follow this healthy clock on this left-hand side, then you have better sleep quality, and you have better mood, metabolism, cardiovascular health, and decreased risk for disease. So time-restricted eating promotes healthy circadian rhythm as well as healthy light exposure and sufficient sleep. Whereas if you follow disruptive circadian rhythms by being a shift worker that is working at night, or by having continuous jet lag, or with aging or an erratic lifestyle, what happens is you have the opposite: decreased sleep quality, increased risk for disease, increased disruptives of metabolism, etc. So I found some human studies on time-restricted eating. This one happened to be an 8-week study where they followed a 4-hour eating window, 4 days a week, versus a normal diet the rest of the week. And this is in active young males. They also did resistance training. So this would probably apply to most of you, most of your clients, right? Also training. No limitation on what you could eat during the eating window. So it's just within that 4-hour eating window. You can eat whatever you want within 4 hours. And the results were that the time-restricted eating group ate significantly fewer calories, 667. You can imagine if you only ate 4 hours to eat, right? It's going to reduce how many calories you consume versus your normal eating pattern. But there were no significant changes in body composition. So it appeared that in this study, people made up for it on the days that they didn't use the time-restricted eating. And you can see some of the values here. Lean mass at baseline versus 8 weeks. Same thing with fat mass at baseline versus 8 weeks. No significant changes. Okay, this study was a 16-8 time-restricted eating study. That means that they had an 8-hour window to eat compared to a normal diet with resistance training. So this was 34 young normal weight males. They did 8 hours of eating followed by a fast of 16, or they were randomized to following their normal diet. And then they ate their normal calories and same macros between the groups, training 3 days a week. So what happened? They lost weight, right? However, the time-restricted eating group lost significantly more, 3.6 pounds versus 0.7 as measured by DEXA. There were similar gains in both groups, right? So no significant differences between the two, similar increases in strength. And then in the time-restricted eating group, you had lower levels of anabolic hormones. What that means long-term, we don't know. It was an 8-week study. So there you have it. Time-restricted eating results in weight loss. Now, this was a review on intermittent fasting, just the intermittent fasting as a whole category. A lot of different studies were pulled into this review, and Stockman found that weight loss occurred between 2.5 to 9.9%, but it varied depending on the type of fasting and the population. So if you're using fasting compared to continuous calorie restriction per day, up to a year, it shows you get about the same results. However, when people use alternate day fasting, the dropout rate was significantly higher, as high as 40%. So adherence might be an issue with this. Okay, so some of the pros and cons: equally effective as just normal dieting or reducing calories. There's limited research on the different type of fasting protocols. Adherence, sticking to the diet, being hungry obviously isn't pleasant, so that's going to be an issue. What about your social life? not getting to eat when everybody else is socializing or going to functions and parties. That might be a negative, but there's some emerging research on health benefits of biomarkers and the microbiome with intermittent fasting. There are cases where you want to avoid intermittent fasting altogether. Obviously, it's with people who are taking medication which require food. So you don't want to alter your medication protocol, like people with diabetes, primarily using insulin, etc. If you have a history of eating disorders, that might lead to disordered eating, or it might exacerbate a condition. If you're a growing adolescent, or if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you want to avoid intermittent fasting. Okay, so we've gone through all those main ones, and I think I've got a good amount of time left. I'm going to try to wrap up this and take your questions in a few minutes. So let's do some concluding remarks here. Okay, so, I didn't cover intermittent if it fits your macros. Let's do it real quick. So if it fits your macros. Now this is counting calories, counting macros, essentially protein, carbs, and fats. So this is really grounded in dietetics training, right? As dietitians, we learn to calculate how many calories you need, calculate how much protein, carbs, fats. That's where it really came from. And it was really popularized by one dietitian in particular, Alan Aragon. He was on some online forums, and he would answer questions about whether or not people could eat certain things while following their diet plans. And his response was, well, if it fits your macros, it works fine, right? So nowadays, I've seen it taken to an extreme, but that's essentially what it is: counting calories, tracking calories, measuring, etc. So, for instance, here are the steps to do if it fits your macros, right? You would start, okay, calculate your calorie expenditure. The DotFit system uses the Mifflin-St. Jean equation to determine what your RMR is, your resting metabolic rate. Then you would figure out how active you are. You would apply an activity factor to your RMR. It normally ranges between 1.1 up to 2.0 plus to see what your total calorie burn or energy needs would be per day. Then you would calculate your protein needs based on this range of 0.6 to 1.4 grams per pound per body weight per day. Then you would distribute your carbs and fats based on your needs and preferences. So if you like higher fat, you could eat higher fat. If you like higher carb, you could eat higher carb. So essentially, it's flexible diet. That's another term that people use, is flexible diet. So there's a lot of benefits to this flexible type of dieting, right? Because no food is off limits. You could fit anything you want into if it fits your macros, or flexible dieting. The other thing is the fact that if you're tracking everything you're eating and you're tracking every single macronutrient, well, you're going to get pretty knowledgeable about food content, food choices, and your awareness is going to increase of every food choice that you're making. And the diet can also be highly tailored to the individual. So this is what we do with physique athletes, with celebrities, with professional athletes, is we get down into the weeds with these individuals so that they can achieve a specific look, a specific performance, a specific body composition. The cons of if it fits your macros is you got to track. You got to track continuously. And for some people's personality, I know some of you out there, you're really analytical, you like the spreadsheets, you like looking at data, that works for you, and that's fine. Weighing and measure foods is not a problem. Having to, do some food prep and measure everything out, that works for you to be able to do that every single week. But it does make restaurant eating and social occasions a little bit challenging. People who follow this type of diet tend to, pack their food, especially if they're prepping. In some cases, I've seen where it justifies eating excessive amounts of junk foods. People saying, well, I can eat this, dozen Krispy Kreme donuts because it fits my macros, that type of thing. So, and that could obviously lead to a poor diet. And then, obsessive tendencies. Any of you that are obsessive, that might make it worse, or it could lead to anxiety and stress in some people. So those are some of the cons in the if it fits your macros approach. Okay, so what conclusions can we make? Take a look at this graphic. There's a common denominator in all of these diets. This is another dietitian who put this together. I was impressed. I thought it was really brilliant the way that she captured how these popular diets work. Whether it's a ketogenic diet or any of these other low carb, they take something away. The paleo diet too, right? You take away entire food groups, or you're not allowed to eat certain foods, well, you automatically cut calories. With intermittent fasting, well, you only have certain time to eat, so you cut calories. With intuitive eating, you cut down binge eating and overeating. Well, that cuts calories. If you're counting, if you're using meal plans, if you're counting points, all of those are versions of portion control, which cuts calories. So the common denominator to all of these is they reduce calories, and if they establish a calorie deficit, they all result in weight loss. However, the question is, how long? Because what I found is most people, they follow this diet cycle, right? They start a diet, they restrict something, they feel deprived, they crave, they give in, they feel guilty, and then they go off the diet. And they do that over and over again. And what happens is they end up feeling like that. What we know in the research is that 95% of people who follow a fad diet tend to regain the weight within a year, and in many cases, they put on more weight after that. So the take-home message there is it's really hard to change all your habits overnight for the rest of your life. So what is the best diet? I promised you that I would answer that question. The best weight loss diet is, well, it's the one that A, puts you in a calorie deficit, and the one you can stick to. So if it does those two things, that's going to be the best weight loss diet for you. However, adherence is the key factor that determines your long-term success. Can you sustain these eating habits long-term, right? Adherence is king. And what we know is that adherence by diet type is pretty similar. So if you look at this study, analyzing the Atkins and the Zone, variations of low-carb diets, Weight Watchers, which is portion control, Ornish, which is high-carb, low-fat, they all had similar adherence rate. It decreases over time. People have a hard time sticking to these eating patterns. And that's because temporary strategies lead to temporary results, right? So are they healthy? Here's a key takeaway. We talk about these diets and they're inducing weight loss, but we also have to consider, what about the quality of their diet? Are they nourishing? Are they going to nourish our clients and help them with not just losing weight, but living longer? And so this study analyzed 4 menu plans, 4 popular diets for 27 essential micronutrients, right? The Atkins, the DASH, the South Beach, the Best Life. These are all variations of the popular diets that we see today. Basically, they all failed to provide requirements for all 27 essential nutrients. They all had missing about 12 micronutrients. In order to get all 27 micronutrients in the daily requirements, you'd have to consume close to 28,000 calories a day, which of course you'd become obese. And we know that micronutrient shortages is linked to higher risk of diseases, including obesity, heart disease, cancer, and osteoporosis. So I want to just sort of see the conclusion of this study. The conclusion of this study, take a look, I highlighted it, right? Based on the study finding, the belief that a healthy, balanced diet can consistently deliver to a typical dieter all of the essential vitamins and minerals they need through whole food alone is in dire need of revision, right? And it also recommended, okay, if you're following a popular diet plan, you would benefit from filling your nutritional gaps with supplementation. So I put together this chart for you guys. This is each diet. I know I didn't cover vegan and gluten-free, but I captured it here, right? It's a summary of the diet. As you can see, they all cut back on something. They all create a calorie deficit. Here are the missing nutrients. And remember, essential nutrients are not produced in the diet. If you don't get them, something breaks down over time. And here would be some of the recommended ways that you could fill those nutrient gaps, right? And not put your clients at risk for disease and health complications. So I want to leave you with this. Protein seems to have a special property, if you will, or several special properties. It has a protective effect against preserving lean tissue, but it also suppresses appetite. It also helps burn more calories because it has a higher thermic effect of feeding. In other words, you have to burn more calories and utilize more calories breaking down protein compared to carbohydrates and fats. And what the research shows is if calories are equal, if you eat higher protein versus lower protein, you're going to lose more body fat and either maintain or gain lean body mass if you're resistance training. So protein appears to have a protective effect. Okay, so what are the key habits of successful losers, right? So this is the key takeaways, because again, the failure rate of fad dieters is really high. So what do people do that lose weight and keep it off? This is a database from the National Weight Control Registry. People who've lost an average of 66 pounds and kept it off for 5.5 years. Here, and they've lost between 30 and 300 pounds. Here's what they found. 98% modified their food intake. So yes, they changed their eating habits, but here's the thing. They've had to maintain those changes in eating habits. So they've adopted behaviors that they can sustain long-term. 94% increase their physical activity, 90% exercise on average an hour a day, with walking being the most common form, 78% eat breakfast, 75% monitor their weight. And here's the catch with this. They don't let small amounts of weight loss turn into large weight rebounds. They limit TV. 62% watch less than 10 hours of TV per week, and most report consuming a low-calorie, low-fat diet. Okay, so here's my last image for you guys. Don't believe the hype when these diets say, hey, this is the best diet, because one size does not fit all. You have to consider, what are the pros and cons? What can I maintain the rest of my life? And does it create a calorie deficit? And there you have it. That's popular diets. So if you're still here, I would love questions.
Kat, can you hear me? Can you hear me right now?
Still here?
I stayed on. I was so fascinated. Hang on, let me see if I can get this on. I was so fascinated, I had to stay on the whole time. That was great. That was really, really good and just very enlightening. And what a shock the conclusion is.
Shocker.
Well, I know. It was great, but just fascinating. You know, that there's so many studies around it, and I think that's that. You know, and you're capturing all those and kind of putting it right out there like that. You see, I think it's going to help everybody have an intelligent conversation with people that are doing these things, and that's why. And I guess at the end of the day, everybody, you now know why we've become diet agnostic. We will give you the facts of those 8 reference diets. That's probably the best way to go. The gram per pound of protein, and then make the rest of it work for your cells. But we become diet agnostic because cut your calories, it all works. Now when it comes to a health standpoint, the good news is because we incorporate. And I loved your last few slides. I mean, those are always the most telling.
Right.
Is because we're holistic in nature, we include exercise, we include your menu planning, and we fill your gaps. So we cover the whole thing, and that's the difference, of course, of what we do versus everybody else, and what you guys do here on the webinar. So yeah, that was great. I just loved it. I'm looking forward to some of the questions here. Yeah.
All right, cool. Okay, so let's see, what do we got? I know I kind of went a little longer. I told myself I shouldn't include all the studies I did, but I just couldn't resist. You know how I am.
Yeah, no, I know. Listen, I'm gonna get just as bad.
Okay, so Mike wants to know, one thing with ketones is that it actually increases your energy. Why would that be? Also, if this is the case, how long does that? I think, okay, so I've heard too, it increases your energy. I've also heard that for some people, it sharpens their senses, they're able to think more clearly, etc. And really nobody knows. People have theories around. Have you seen anything, Neil, in regards to ketosis?
Yes, and it is that initial adaptation, and Kat, from some of the actors I work with, I had to put them into ketosis in order to get them into that tight window of filming very quickly under the production schedule. And I tell them exactly what's going to happen. You are going to get to a place where you'll probably pass out in the middle of a workout, and then when you wake up, you will be okay, and then you go into euphoria. So your second or third day, you go to a place of euphoria, and that is the hormone changing going around from being completely out of energy from your favored energy source by the body, which of course is carbohydrate, and then a little bit from the protein, and now you're switching over to the fat. Once you switch over, the body goes through a really strange sort of adaptation. It's very short-lived though, so you're not going to have more energy forever. Trust me, I got news for you. You will be, and that's why I say it's very dangerous for some people to do it, because they will actually pass out sometimes, and they will get there depending on how their blood sugar is managed just naturally in the body. So, but yeah, it is. There is a time where you do feel like you might have a little more energy, and then you do feel like you're in euphoria and go, oh God, this is great, I can do this. And you feel like your brain kicks in. And that's a very temporary adaptation, survival adaptation, because our ancient ancestors developed that because they would go into ketosis from not eating anything at all for days and days and weeks sometimes.
Yep. So,
but it's very short-lived, very short-lived.
Very, very short-lived, and it's highly subjective. Some people do keto and they like it, they enjoy it, they can do it, you know. So if you're curious, then and it helps you, go for it. Okay, so Mike also wants to know what's the legitimacy of fasting causing HGH release, less cortisol release, and being very beneficial for fat loss and muscle gain. Okay, yes, those things have been observed, most animal models, but it does not translate to superior fat loss or superior changes in lean body mass. So these are all just, you know, the more research will come out, but Mike, at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, and if you, again, you can have all the growth hormone release you want, but if you don't have nutrients that are deposited in the lean body mass, it's a joke. And again, there's always a temporary adaptation to some of these things, but fasting is obviously counterintuitive when it comes to depositing nutrients into lean body mass. That's where they have to go. No professional athlete fasts unless it's off season, temporary for some reason. You certainly would not do it. It's a completely different world when it comes to maintaining and improving lean body mass over time.
So Mike's on a roll. He also wants to know, he's taught that eating often increases metabolism, or will fasting increase metabolism, or neither. And so what you need to know about that is that the body of research shows that timing of meals doesn't make a significant difference in regards to weight loss. I mean, it really doesn't. So you might see a shift here or there, but at the end of the day, whether you eat, 5 meals a day, 2 or 3, at the end of the day, it doesn't make a big difference on your metabolism.
Yeah, and the only place it would make a difference, and you're right, when weight loss studies show exactly that. But I mean, the most successful weight losers on the planet are obviously bodybuilders. I mean, there's no one is more successful than them, obviously to an extreme, a crazy extreme, but your physique athletes, they have to do that. Well, they eat 6-7 times a day, obviously, and most of that is to be able to feed lean body mass at the times the protein synthesis, the 4-hour cycle takes place. So that's one of the things about feeding, frequently. But to Kat's point, when you look at the average person, there really is very little difference in metabolism.
Metabolism, exactly. Building lean body mass, that's a different story. But in metabolism, you don't really see the difference. Okay, so then let's see, who else has a question here? I see Paul. Time restricted fasting and 100-minute morning workouts with calories, that is no breakfast. So Paul, I'm not really sure what the question is, but some people do utilize time-restricted eating and end up doing fasted cardio, if you will, or a fasted workout. Some people can tolerate it. Some people can't. If you're doing high-intensity activity that requires, obviously, glucose as your primary source, you might have some challenges around that if you're depleting your glycogen stores. So I think it depends on the person and what exact activity that you're doing.
Yeah, and the example I like to give people, can you imagine going to a 3-hour football practice and not eating before it? I mean, they all drop dead. And we have problems with professionals and college athletes that didn't eat right before it, and they're passing out, in the first hour. So obviously it's not the right way to go if you want to maximize the activity. Is it the right way to go for, maybe burning a few more calories from fat? Well, yes, probably. But because you don't have anything else in your gut except, drawing from your fat at that point. So maybe that is, but what happens at the end of the day? You're going to put it back in with the food. So it's the total calories at the end of the day that's going to make a difference when it comes to body fat anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so Brandon Bender. Hey, Brandon, good to see you on here. He wants to know, what would you suggest for a fighter or wrestler who's to lose weight before competition? Okay, the answer to that, Brandon, is it depends, right? How much does a fighter have to lose, right? So what does they make weight? Obviously, they make weight, but how much do they have to lose, and how much? Also, what can the fighter tolerate? Obviously, the name of the game here is we don't compromise performance. Right, Neil? I mean, that's the main thing. And everybody's different. So it would really, for me, it would take, I can't give you a generic answer, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your time frame. You know, if you've blown it and you've got to lose 10, 15 pounds in the last week, yes, it can be done. It's a miserable thing. And of course, as you know, my son's a fighter and always making weight, but he starts way before that. So it's a very gradual weight loss to make the weight class. And that way you have to do very little towards the end, other than maybe a quick dehydration or something, and then hydrate after weigh-in.
And hydrate after weigh-in.
It really depends. And if you ever get in a jam like that, get a hold of Zane. You know, he'll tell you what to do.
Yeah. Call us. We'll help you out, Brandon.
That's right. Get a hold of Zane. Just follow him on Instagram and he'll tell you what to do. That's his job. Get fighters in shape.
Exactly. Okay, well, I don't see any questions coming through. If you have a last minute one, please type them in. I'm happy to answer. I did do a 3-part video course on popular diets. I actually go into more detail, believe it or not. And I also go through all the exercise recommendations for weight loss. That's probably going to surprise you and blow you away a little bit. And that's going to be offered probably sometime later this year, I would say. And in the meantime, Neil, do you got any announcements or anything that you would like to share with the group?
No, what are we doing next time, you know? Do you know what it is next one?
Yeah, so next month is going to be healthy aging.
Okay, got it. Well, that's very important to me, of course.
Of course. Well, and our client base, right?
I'm still getting younger.
You are still getting. You're going backwards.
All right. Well, listen, that was great, Kat. I loved it. That's why I'm stuck on. Now I'm going to be late to the wedding, of course.
Don't blame me. Well, thanks everyone for staying on. Thank you so much. We will post a recording on our website probably early next week. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. You know my email, kat@dotfit.com. You know Neil's, neal@dotfit.com. We answer all the emails, so don't hesitate to reach out. And thanks for joining. Have fun, Neil.
Okay. Thanks. See you, Kat. See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.